and the Pea. The little mermaid swam into her grandmother's cave, perched herself on a large piece of orange coral, and rested her chin on her hands. "Why so glum, Selima?" asked her grandmother. "The current is strong and the winds run high. I thought you loved a good storm." "Yes, but I won't get to see it, so what's the point?" "It won't be long now, young one. Be patient," said grandmother, smiling. "Your time will come. Now swim along. Your father will be wondering where you are." Selima loved everything about the upper world. The stories that she heard made it sound so exciting. She longed to know what it was like up there, what it meant to be human, to walk, to run, and to dance. A tail was pretty good, but she couldn't help thinking that life would be 10 times more fun with legs. Selima hugged her grandmother, and as she swam away, she made a decision to do it. She would take a secret path to the surface. It was against the rules, but no one would know, and she simply couldn't wait any longer to see her first storm. As her head broke the surface of the water, her eyes were as big as plates. She couldn't believe the deep blue color of the sky and the angry clouds rolling above. There in the distance, the little mermaid could see a large ship being tossed around like a child's toy in the high winds and waves that were tall as mountains. A sailor fell overboard and splashed around trying to climb back up when an enormous wave hit the ship side on and almost turned it over. The ship then turned into the crest of the wave and sailed away. But what about the man who had fallen overboard? Selima dived down and stared into the murky deep. The sailor was far off in the distance, tumbling over and over, dragged down by the strong current. She didn't know what to do, but she knew she couldn't watch him drown. Without another thought, she swam towards him, grabbed hold of his jacket, and pulled him up to the surface. He seemed to be breathing, but his eyes were closed and he flopped heavily in the waves. Selima watched as his ship disappeared into the distance. She looked around and spied a cove where she could push him onto shore. Once he was on the sand, she drew back to the deep water to watch what would happen next. It seemed like an age until he finally moved. He coughed and spluttered and turned onto his side before sitting up. It was clear he didn't know where he was or how he had got there, but Selima was glad that he was safe at last. "Someone's going to be in trouble when Daddy finds out," said a voice behind her. Selima turned in the waves to see an old mermaid bobbing there. He was going to die. I had to save him." "Had to or wanted to?" Selima didn't know what to say. "Don't worry, I won't tell," said the mermaid with a wink. "I'm Lilith. I know how you feel. I bet your family say you're too young." "They do." "Well, I am too young according to the mermaid rules." "Stupid rules," said Lilith. "I know," said the little mermaid in agreement. "You're Selima, aren't you? I know your father." The little mermaid started to panic. "Please, don't tell him. I won't do it again, I promise." Lilith tilted her head to one side and gave a half smile. "Rule-breaking and lying. You're a real rebel, aren't you, Selima?" The little mermaid was starting to think that this day was going from bad to worse. "Don't worry," said Lilith. "I can keep a secret. So do you know much about the upper world?" Selima shook her head. "No, but I wish I did." "Love it," said Lilith, smiling. "The sky, the mountains, the hills, the people, and those legs," said Lilith. "I only wish I could go up there myself." "I know, me too." Said Lilith, tapping her bony fingers on her chin. There is a way, you know. I mean, it's pretty tough, and you probably wouldn't be allowed. Wait, you can get me up there, with legs? Yep, said Lilith. But there is a cost. Oh, but I don't have any money, said Selima, her heart sinking. Is there anything else that I can give you? There is one thing, said Lilith quietly. Anything, said Selima excitedly. Well, in return for an amazing life up there, all I need is your voice. Selima touched her throat. But I'm quite attached to it. Lilith tutted loudly. I thought you were serious. I am, honestly. It's just that... Won't I need it? Silly girl, said Lilith. Do you know nothing about humans? Voices are hardly used up there. You won't miss it, trust me. The old mermaid then produced a large flat piece of seaweed covered in tiny writing. Sign this contract and you can start your adventure right away. Wait, what? Now? No time to lose, said Lilith happily. I'm sure they'll love you up there, that prince especially. Selima's eye widened. Prince? Oh yes, he's a prince, didn't you know? Anyway, if he doesn't grow to love you, then you'll just come back. To the ocean? Lilith nodded. We all end up in the ocean, no matter what. Now, your signature here, please. Shouldn't I read it first? Asked Selima nervously. Don't you trust me? Said Lilith, looking quite upset. Yes, of course I do, said Selima, worried about being rude. She took the pen and signed her name. Then everything went black. Selima woke up on the shore. The sun was shining brightly. She had no memory of how she'd come to be there, and she was starting to shiver. She'd never felt the cold before, and sat up and hugged herself to get warm. Then she looked down and saw that instead of her tail, she had legs. The old mermaid had done it. I don't believe it, thought Selima, and tried to say, wow, but the sound caught in her throat. Of course, she'd swapped her voice for these legs. She had a moment of sadness because in the ocean, Selima was known for her beautiful singing voice, and now it was gone. Young lady, are you okay? Selima looked up and smiled to see the face of the prince that she had saved from the ship and dragged to shore. He took off his cloak and wrapped it around Selima. Come, he said kindly. Let's get you warm. There are some clothes up at the castle. You must tell me how you came to be here like this. The little mermaid wanted to, more than anything. But without a voice, how could she? As they walked to the castle along the sandy track, Selima used simple gestures to show that she was unable to speak, and the prince seemed to understand. Weeks passed, and Selima enjoyed the beauty of the world she had watched from afar. She became good friends with the prince and all of the courtiers. They took her on horseback rides into the mountains and through the lush green forests. She was overjoyed at every single sight and smell that the upper world has to offer. Life was good, but bad news came one morning when the little mermaid learned that the prince was due to be married to a princess of a nearby land. She realized that perhaps her dreams of being with him were gone and she would have to return to the sea. The thought of leaving the upper world made her very sad, but she told herself that at least she had had an adventure that no other mermaid had been lucky enough to know. In her sadness, the little mermaid walked down to the sea at night when the rest of the castle were asleep. She sat on the sand and felt the soft, salty waters breaking on her toes. She heard splashing in the waves beyond the rocks, and was overjoyed to see her sisters bobbing in the waves. She could not mistake their long, flowing silver hair in the water. She could not say hello, of course, but Jemima and Amelia already knew why. They told her that they knew all about the deal that she had made with Lilith. "You should have come to us first," explained her sister Amelia. "No one ever did well from dealing with Lilith." The little mermaid nodded to show that she understood. "If the prince doesn't marry you, then you will die," added Jemima. The little mermaid shook her head and frowned to show that this wasn't true. She gestured that whatever happened, she would return to the sea. "She tricked you, Selima," said Amelia. "I swam into Lilith's cave when she wasn't there, and I saw the contract. It said that you can only return to the sea when you are dead. If the prince marries someone else, then at sunrise the following morning, you will return to the foam and be lost forever." Well, this was a complete shock to Selima, but she believed her sisters. She knew that the prince's wedding was set for 1 week's time, and her head span at the thought that soon she might die. The week passed quickly, and Selima tried to spend as much time with the prince as possible. She hoped that perhaps he would change his mind and instead choose her to be his bride. But on the day of the wedding, as the guests boarded the wedding boat and stowed away their bags, Selima began to realize that this might be her last day. The wedding took place without a hitch. The sun shone and the bride and groom gave their vows. The guests cried and the party went on late into the night. Finally, once all the guests had gone to bed, Selima lay awake in her cabin. She wrapped her bedsheet around her and walked out to the deck. She watched the midnight sky with its blanket of stars and the grapefruit moon reflecting on the surface of the dark water. In the morning, her life would be over. Then Selima saw 2 bald heads floating in the water. She did not recognize them at first, but as she looked closer, she realized it was her sisters, but their hair was completely gone. She beckoned them over to the bow of the ship. "We found a way to save you," said Amelia, holding up a large knife with a coral handle. "We got it from the sea witch," explained Jemima. "We gave her our hair in return." "Now we don't have much time," said Amelia, holding up the knife. "This can save your life." Jemima took a deep breath and then said solemnly, "The prince must die by this blade." This was all too much. She had the chance to live, but it would be without the prince. Amelia handed her the blade. Selima took it and nodded. Her sisters turned their tails and disappeared beneath the foam. It was nearly dawn. Time was running out, so she walked to the royal cabin where the prince and princess lay sleeping. The little mermaid stood by the bed with the knife in her hand. Through the small circular window she could see the sky brightening. As she stood there in the dim light, Selima realized just how much she cared for him, and in that instant she knew what she had to do. She ran out to the ship's deck, threw the blade into the sea, and dived into the water, knowing that her time was up and the sun's first light would return her to the foam forever. Her sisters appeared beside her. They could not believe what Selima had done, and they cried, the salty waters mixing with the waves and foam. They swam together, holding each other tightly as the first bright glimmer of sun broke the horizon. Rays of golden sun changed the night to day, but instead of disappearing into the foam, the little mermaid and her sisters watched as the sun rose higher and higher into the sky. Selima's legs began to tingle. She looked down to see that her beautiful tail was back. "What's happening?" she cried out, tears of joy pouring down her face, then noticed that her sister's hair had magically reappeared on their heads. "Your voice," said Amelia. "The magic is wearing off," cried out Jemima as the sisters jumped and splashed, hugging each other and laughing. But why? It's simple, said a familiar voice from behind them. Grandmother, they all cried out together. Selima, said their grandmother in the waves, with a broad smile on her face. My little one, you have shown love and compassion and chosen to put others before yourself. It has broken the evil magic of the sea witch. But the contract, said Selima. Grandmother shook her head wisely. No contract can contain the power of true love and sacrifice. Selima felt the foam and salt water on her skin. She was a mermaid once more, and looked to her family and smiled, her heart bursting with every passing moment. She turned in the water to watch the prince's ship as it sailed away towards the land. She imagined his face as he slept on the bed next to his princess. Selima felt sad and happy at the same time, happy for him and for his future, and also for her own, with her family beneath the waves. She smiled at her sisters, gave a large swish of her powerful tail, and they all disappeared beneath the waves. She couldn't wait to tell her father about her incredible adventure. And what an adventure it had been.